Hello, this is Dr. Jessica Han. In this section, we're going to talk about species interactions, food webs, species diversity, and some invasive species. Community ecology is talking about all the species that live in the same area at the same time. For example, our neighborhood. Within our subdivision, we have our human beings, our neighbors, our families, and also we have pets, we have wild animals like rabbits, rats in the yard. Sometimes we have deers passing by our neighborhood. So the community include all the species that live in this area. Organisms in a community compete for food, water, sunlight, and living space. The interspecies interactions can be helpful, harmful, or neutral to each population involved. The relationship between the species can be described in the following table. First, some species can compete between each other. This kind of relationship or interaction is called competition. When two species compete for resources like food or water, the impact to both species are negative. Another interaction called mutualism. This kind of relationship is going to benefit both species. For example, the flowers and their pollinators like bees or butterflies. They're going to benefit each other. Predation relationship is going to benefit for one species, who is the predators, and harmful to the other species, who is the primary producers or the lower level of consumers. Herbivory is another interaction between species. One species is beneficial, the other one is being harmful. For example, the deer will eat forest plants. The plants will be the producer, which being eaten, so it's being harmed. However, the deer is beneficial because he gets food. Parasitism or pathogens, they are going to be harmful to the host. For example, the virus or the bacteria invade our body and stay in our body, get our nutrition and being multiplied by our genomic systems. The last interaction between species is called commensalism. Commensalism is neutral for one species, but beneficial to the other species. There are some aggregates can be found from the cattle. Aggregates will eat insects on the cattle, but the aggregates does not affect the cattle at all. So the cattle will be neutral, but the aggregates is beneficial by getting food from the cattle's skin. Now we are going to talk about those interactions in a little bit details. First, competition. According to the competitive exclusion principle, if the resources required by two species are too similar, they cannot coexist. So when the resources are limited, the competition interaction will be existed, then only the stronger one will win. Mutualism, the flowers and their pollinators, they are both getting benefit from each other. So mutualism is a form of interspecies interaction in which both species benefit. It often occurs among species that are living in close physical association with one another. One-sided advantage, predations, or herbivory. This kind of interaction is benefiting one species but be harmful to the other species. Predation is an interaction in which a predator species kills and eats a prey species. Herbivory is the eating plant parts by an animal. Parasite can live in the host, then get benefit from the host. Pathogens are similar. Pathogens are disease-causing microorganisms, can be multiplied using the host system. Both parasite and pathogens will bring negative impact to the host. We mentioned tropical structure in earlier chapters. A tropical structure describes the feeding relationships within a community. So the tropical structure can be described using food chain or food webs. Food webs or food chain are described the transfer of organic material from one tropical level to the next. This is an example of food chain. They started from the bottom level of producer, then the second one will be primary consumer, the next level will be secondary consumer, upper level will be tertiary or even quaternary consumers. We mentioned earlier that the energy will be transferred through the tropical structures and the energy will be reduced more and more from lower level to the top level. Sometimes when multiple food chains connecting to each other, it forms a food web. Sometimes not only the energy can be transferred from lower level to the top level, but some biomolecules can also be transferred to the top level. Some molecules or minerals can be accumulating and being magnified to the top level consumers. For example, the mercury in the ocean can be magnified and accumulated in the fish that are top level feeders. Within a community, the species diversity is important. The species are more diverse, that community will have a better chance for survival. In these two figures here, forest A, forest B, they have the same number of species. The species richness is the same. Under that situation, you're going to look at the relative abundance, which is the fraction counted by each species. In forest A, different type of trees are almost evenly distributed, but in forest B, the eastern hemlock is predominant and has much more abundance than the rest of the species. Therefore, when there's a harsh condition occur, the forest A will have a better chance to survive. In some community, a ketone species is also important. The ketone species is a species that has a disproportional large effect on its environment relative to its abundance. It may not have a lot, but its existence is very important to the community to maintain a balance. Remove this ketone species can affect the richness and the diversity of the entire community. Communities can change. They're not going to be static all the time. Periodical disturbance can wipe out a habitat. The habitat will be recolonized through ecological succession. When ecological succession happens, it may take hundreds of years for the community to be rebuilt. For example, there's a primary succession occurs when an area has been rendered virtually lifeless with no soil. So it can be due to volcano, due to fire, due to earthquake. So whatever disturbance it happens, they can change this area to be totally lifeless. So it's going to take many years for this area to grow some vegetation again. The secondary section occurs after disturbance that kills much of the life in the area but leaves the soil intact. In comparison to the primary succession, the soil is completely destroyed. The secondary succession can leave some vegetations on the area after that happened. So the recovery of the trees, grasses, or other type of plants will be much quicker. In some community, there are some invasive species. Invasive species is the non-native organisms are introduced into a community. When they spread rapidly, they become invasive. Sometimes invasive species are a leading cause of extinction of local populations. For example, when lionfish were introduced into Caribbean, they can consume other fish voraciously. Here's another example. The pythons were set loose in Florida, and he's the invasive species. He's a huge snake that can eat a lot of vegetations or small animals. Kudzu is a climbing vine who is introduced to the southern US. It can kill the trees. The community can be controlled. Ecologists may implant biological control to control the invasive species in the community. For example, mongoose were introduced to Hawaii to eat rats. therefore to maintain a balance in the community. In summary, we talk about the community ecology in this section. We introduce you to the relationships among species. We also talk about the food webs and some important concepts about invasive and ketone species. And we mentioned that diversity of species in the community is very important. Hopefully this section is helpful for you to study chapter 12.